Hello and welcome to the reading of the fourth official short story here on ThreeDayStories.com. The subject that I chose for this story is Chloreae, which is a tribe of orchids. And here's the story. It is called Smelling Ice. The strong winds pushed Stan's hair into his eyes over and over again. But Stan had to continue searching. This was his last chance. The tour guide had given them 45 minutes to explore the island and its pristine natural habitat. Stan was freezing. When he set out for his journey to South America, he didn't think to bring a winter coat. Now the cold Arctic air was slowly seeping through every layer of his clothing. A woman from the ship that brought him here approached him from behind. Stanley didn't turn his head. He didn't want to look at her. "It's wonderful, isn't it? Is this your first time here?" the woman asked. Stanley nodded ever so slightly and continued scanning the ground with his eyes. "Can you smell that? It's a really special kind of air," the woman said while taking a deep breath. "I think it comes from the fact that the Atlantic and the Pacific meet here. Two worlds colliding, And I'd like to imagine that I can smell a bit of ice as well. The Arctic is only..." Stanley interrupted her. "I'm sorry. I don't want to be rude, but I would rather like to be alone." He finally looked up and into her eyes. She could see that his mouth was clenched, as if it hadn't been used to form a smile in a long time. Her eyes wandered around quickly, as if they were trying to find a reaction to his ruthless candor. Before she could say anything, though, Stan had already walked away from her. The soil beneath his worn-down sneakers seemed to get tougher and tougher. The weeds and shrubs were becoming sparser and leaner with every step. The wind stung his dried-out eyes, and Stan had to stop for a second and firmly press his eyelids down to afford them a short relief. As he opened his eyes, he realized that he was only a few dozen steps away from the edge of the cliff. He lifted his left arm to take a look at his watch, but he knew that he didn't have enough time left to make another detour before approaching his final destination. Once again, the wind blew Stan's hair into his eyes. He hadn't let it grow out so long since his college days. But during the last 4 months, he didn't feel the need to get it cut as regularly as he did the last 22 years. He swept free his view and continued on his path, eyes still glued to the ground. After a minute or two, the shore slowly started to creep into his peripheral vision. This made Stan focus on the ground before him even harder. He forced every muscle around his eyes to not lose track of what he wanted them to do. But soon the urge to look down and the conflicting fixation on the blurry line on the edge of his vision made him dizzy. His feet tried to find safe hold on the rough gravel, but ultimately lost that struggle. Stan found himself on all fours, panting with exhaustion and shivering from the cold. He stared at the ground beneath him and wished he could cry, just to feel some sort of relief. But he had not a single tear left in him. Stan clawed his hands into the cold, wet ground, trying to feel something that was alive. But all he felt was a bit of crude, dried-up moss. No other plants around, no shrubs, no weeds, and especially no flowers. So Stan pushed himself up, raised his eyes up to the horizon, and just scuffled towards the edge of the cliff. As the endless, dark blue waters in front of him filled his view, he felt like every breath he took was draining him of something. The cold air streaming through his lungs flushed away all sense of responsibility that he had held on to for the last months. He finally felt like there was nothing more that he could reasonably be asked to do. He had been on the road for 17 weeks, traveling down the Andes, spending his savings, risking his safety. He had many guided expeditions and even set out into the wilderness by himself a few times. People had shown him other species, but it was never quite the right one. And now he was at what felt like the end of the world. Nowhere left to go but back. Stan slowly unzipped his windbreaker and reached into his inside pocket. He pulled out a little book wrapped in translucent brown paper. He carefully unwrapped it and leafed through the book. Then he confidently stopped his finger on a certain page, as if he had done it 1,000 times before. The page showed an illustration of a flower. It seemed a bit plain at first sight, but it was very delicate. Its dotted white blossom was embedded in a 3-leafed chalice, which itself had a stubble of frilly fingers at its tips. Although Stan generally knew nothing about flowers, he could recite what was written on this page by heart. It was a short scientific text about this type of orchid. Family Orchidaceae. Tribe Chloreae. Genus Bipinula. It was a herbaceous, durable plant with meaty, sometimes cloddy roots. Contrary to the other orchids, it wasn't epiphytic, which meant that it didn't grow on parts of other plants, but usually in the ground. It was native only to some parts of South America, especially all the way down the lower Andes, right up until the southernmost point of the continent. And that was where Stan's journey had now come to an end. He gently tore out the page from the little book. He got out his wallet and slowly removed the photograph that had been in there for a long time. It was of a woman in her early 20s. She was sitting on a picnic blanket and smiling into the camera. While Stan stared at the picture, he felt like the wind calmed down. He didn't feel the cold anymore, and the smashing of the waves seemed like it was a mile away. "I'm sorry, honey. I couldn't find it. I really tried. I know how much you wanted to find this flower one day, but I can't keep looking any further. There's nowhere left for me to go." Stan had to stop to control his trembling breath, but soon continued. "I know how you always adored this place. I can't stay much longer, but you have all the time in the world now." With these whispered words, he tenderly folded the torn-out page of the book around the old photograph until it resembled an old-fashioned love letter. He lifted up a small rock and placed the little paper beneath it, a tip of it still sticking out and overseeing the ocean in front of it. Stan stood there for a few more minutes, just breathing deeply and staring out into the vast emptiness that lay before him. On the ship ride back, Stan was standing at the railing by himself, while the other tourists were all chatting in little groups about the good time they had. Suddenly he looked up to see the woman from before, standing next to him again. She was just staring into the distance as well. "You know, what you said earlier," he mumbled. "I knew someone else who said the same thing." The woman turned her head to look at him. She could actually make out a little smile as Stan continued, "And I think you're right. I think I could actually smell the ice." That was Smelling Ice. If you want to hear or read more short stories, then head on over to ThreeDayStories.com or check out the other videos on my YouTube channel. Also, I already drew the next 3 short story subjects, so check those out as well and have fun. Bye bye.